but I'm happy to see you're all here and you've all made it. I have the very good pleasure of being able to moderate a panel today, and we're going to talk about relationships and what works, specifically in the arts. And I must say, Arts Ahead people have assembled a panel that in particular, of late, youth programming or what they're presenting for very young audiences is absolutely inspiring. Now, quite often we hear it's only, people with gray hair that are going to arts events, et cetera, and these three are proving that that's wrong. So Sean O'Neill from the Art Gallery of Ontario does adult programming, and the other day I was at the Song Dong lecture, and the place was packed, and everyone there was under 25, which was amazing to see. So there was all sorts of different activities going on at the AGO at the same time. Chris Lorway, who is the director of programming. I probably get all your titles wrong, Get cards later, except for Madeleine. She left them at home. So Chris deals with all the programming at Roy Thomson Hall and Massey Hall. And there's all sorts of partnerships that go on there. And there's one initiative that I think you're probably going to talk about at Massey Hall that is really inspiring. And again, full of a younger audience. Madeleine, who works at the Sony Center and is also the executive director of Fall for Dance North, which had their premiere last year. And they brought in 10 dance companies, 11 dance companies into Toronto. All the tickets were $10, sold out for 3 days. And the audience skewed very young, which again is inspiring. So where we want to start today, Sean, can we start with you talking about a relationship that you built at the AGO that works? 5, 10 minutes, however long.
Sure, yeah. The thing that I'm going to talk about is a relationship that we have actually not with a cultural partner, but with a corporation. And the corporation is AMIA. They're the parent company of Aeroplan. Most of you probably know Aeroplan is the Air Miles of Canada. And AMIA oversees, what we work with on AMIA is a prize, the AMIA AGO Photography Prize. It's a $50,000 prize that we give to an international artist each year, and the public chooses the winner. So the public votes inside the gallery, online, and the winner receives $50,000. There's a group of expert curators who choose the short list, and then from there we open it up to the public. And for me, when we're thinking about case studies and successful partnerships, AMIA comes to mind because it's a really different kind of experimental model for corporate culture sector collaboration. And I think there's a lot to talk about relative to some of the work that we've done with them. The first thing is, it's a sponsorship and a partnership that was sort of designed unlike others that we typically do at the AGO, where we take an exhibition or we take a property that's ripe for funding and we shop it out to different financial institutions, corporations, individuals who might support it. In this case, this started as a conversation between the head of Aeroplan and our director at the time, Matthew Teitelbaum, around the passion that the director of AMIA had for photography and the appetite at the AGO to try to do different kinds of things in the museum sector that related to public engagement. We're an organization that's really invested in trying to find ways to maintain our expertise, but not necessarily maintain our authority. And so what we started working on and designing with AMIA in conversation with them was a program that could help us do some new things, experiment, have a little bit of financial freedom to try different models of engagement and presenting content, and for them to dip their toe into the sponsorship world through a program that was kind of custom designed for the things that they wanted to bring to the table and the ways that they wanted to learn and grow. So some examples of that are built into the partnership is a shared team structure where the AGO is not just the team working on the program and developing the program, but we actually partner our marketing, communications, social, fundraising, and web development teams with counterparts at AMIA, who then teach the AGO staff all kinds of corporate business practices that we didn't know before. In turn, their staff get to work on a special project that for them feels like, oh my God, something outside of getting people to buy Aeroplan points. And it's exciting and a staff engagement tool for them. That was the beginning of how the partnership evolved. It slowly started expanding over the years to the point where AMIA decided they were expanding their offices, they wanted to build an art collection. And so as we were starting to think about ways they could activate or the benefits that the AGO could give them in return for the investment they made, one of the benefits we came up with was that we have an internal art rental and sales department. We would help them build their collection. We would provide consultation. We'd send a curator in once a year to advise them on acquisitions. In turn, they buy everything through our art rental and sales department, which created more revenue for us and in turn generated PR benefit for them. They were profiled in all kinds of business publications about forward-thinking offices and ways that art can help the professional environment. A way that they were able to leverage something to help us was they have a program that they started to pilot called Data for Good. Essentially, Aeroplan is a data marketing company. It's not about rewards anymore. It's about how to leverage data to tailor your invitation to customers. There's all kinds of good things about that and all kinds of things that we could talk about offline about data and that they're aware of and working through. So one of the things they did was pilot this event that was about helping not-for-profits leverage data to access their communities and their audiences in different ways. They took our art courses. We have about a $500,000 art business. They looked at the patterns of who was buying, when they were buying, how often they were buying, how they were returning, gave us a whole bunch of data that allowed us to raise our revenue by about 50% over 2 years. Through this kind of reciprocal benefit of the partnership. In turn, they got a ton of PR about how great their program is, and it is a great program. So I think when I think about the AMIA partnership and the ways that it's evolved and grown, and as our objectives have shifted and their objectives have shifted, we've shifted the program and we've shifted the objectives, some of the lessons that I've taken away from it are, from the beginning, having a kind of set of shared values and an openness and a transparency as to why each partner is involved, and then being able to be flexible as the journey progresses through the ways that there are new leaders that come in, there are new business objectives that come up for both parties. We have different things we want to do with the partnership. We learn as we go. And I think because the partnership was built through a shared conversation about wanting to do something experimental, because we were able to find touch points along the journey, we're now heading into year 8 of this partnership, that allowed us to shift and pivot and try and experiment with new modes of engagement and new modes of reciprocity and benefit for each partnership. And we were able to stay flexible, stay open, stay honest, stay communicative throughout that process. We've ended up with something that is, I think, one of the most preeminent prizes in Canada, and now is a model for other arts institutions. We get calls all the time for people that are talking about ways of engaging people online, engaging people in galleries, getting people to have their say, because we've cracked a lot of things through our partnership with AMIA that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise, through their measurement, through their data, through their analytics, and through the stories we can tell through that measurement and data. I mean, even down to our project management principles. Because when you collaborate with staff and you bring 2 different cultures together, you start to learn processes that actually can then inform your own. And I think for them, in a similar way but in a different way, whereas they've made us a little more linear in our thinking, we've helped make them a little bit more non-linear and linear in their thinking. And of course, they measure their staff engagement and the ways that their staff are engaged, and this has been a real benefit for them. So the practice of that is open and honest communication at all levels, from the CEO to the people who are on the ground communicating and doing the work, and a willingness to be flexible, to change, to stay open, and to respond in a way that allows you to kind of give up something to help the partner get something. And hopefully that's a reciprocal relationship. So that's where I would start, as something that's been positive and long-term. And I oversee the partnership at the AGO, so 3 or 4 years ago, I was the project manager of that prize and that partnership. Now it's within my portfolio, but it's been a really interesting thing to watch grow and evolve and change over the course of those number of years.
Excellent. Chris, you want to tell us about the partnership?
Sure. So my staff is probably ready to kill me right now because we're all partnerships all the time over the last year. I think to reinforce what Sean said, entering into any partnership has to be about equity exchange. You both feel that your contribution is in some way advancing your interests, but also the partner needs to feel the exact same way. And whenever that's out of balance is when partnerships, I think, start to struggle and over time ultimately fail. We are approaching partnerships as a way of trying to advance the profile of the organization within the community. And we've, as I said, gone through a number of different initiatives this year that some have been great, and I think we're going to get later on in the discussion to some that did not go as well. But to start off, I would say one of our biggest successful partnership initiatives has been with multiple partners, our patio series that we launched at Roy Thomson Hall. And again, to reinforce what Sean said, I think at a certain point in a partnership situation, you have to, as a curator or a leader, be willing to sort of step back and realize you're not an expert. And I think that for a lot of people in the arts world, that sense of ceding any of that curatorial responsibility, and there was often that sense that art came from the man on the hill. And I think that there's a much more democratic way of looking at it right now, especially in a city like Toronto, where there are so many different forms of artistic expression that really make up the fabric of who we are as a community. And you want to be able to tap into all that to tell the story of your city and your institution, but to think that you as an individual or even you as a team are knowledgeable in all those areas, I think is naive and frankly dangerous. In the case of the patio, we wanted to take the idea of the edifice of Roy Thomson Hall and try to break it down. For a lot of people, it was a place where the TSO played there. It's where all the TIFF galas were. It had that sense of occasion and almost, it was a dress-up space. And we wanted to humanize it a little bit. So if any of you are familiar with the space, there's a sunken pond right along King Street that's below grade. And a beautiful sort of reflecting pool that the architect Erickson had designed to be a little bit of the north in the center of the city. And while beautiful, it was a very underutilized space, and we felt that there could be great value in that space as a public space. 2 years ago, just as I was starting with the organization, they had done a little bit of an experiment where over a couple of nights they had brought in some performers, mostly from the indie music world, and had put a stage in the pond and tried out live performance in the space. And in the first year, it was a good experiment. I think they learned a lot, but as somebody who was coming into the organization, one of the observations I had right away was the way the stage was configured, you had your back to the city. So all the artists were performing into the building to an audience there, so it gave the sense that it was a private event. It wasn't helped at all by the fact that the only way to actually get into the space was to find your way down through the path and then into the space. So we talked a lot internally about how to rectify that and actually to open it up. So, and also to increase capacity. So we worked with our architecture firm, KPMB and Marianne McKenna, to start to think about how we could re-envision the space and reorient it so that it was more front-facing and open to the city. And so we built a deck over about a third of it, and then put a stage so that it was actually facing down King Street. So as you were walking back to the subway, if you worked in the west part of town and you were coming back into the city, you would see the performances as you were walking in and hopefully be drawn into the space. We also worked on opening up an access point in David Pico Square so that people could come right off the park down a staircase into the space, making it much more accessible. And then we put in amenities like a partnership with Bark Barbecue and our F&B team to create both food and beverage that was hopefully enticing and attractive. And then we had to bring the space to life. And so right away, my mandate to my team was how do we think about ways in which we can create a vibrant atmosphere that really celebrates the city. And so immediately we went out to organizations like the Canadian Reggae World, Lula Lounge, who many of you know has one of the great salsa clubs in town. We went to partners like Small World Music, our friends at Hillside Festival. And what we did was that we tried to get all of them to come in and say, we're actually gonna open this space up to you. We'll give you a pair of dates. We want you to co-curate with us a double bill that in some way reflects your organization and fills this space in a way that's going to be enticing and celebratory of the city. And through that, we ended up getting a great range and mix of artists. Danae, who some of you may know, who's here today, was brought on as our first Charlie Cuts intern and managed that whole event over the summer. So she did a great job, and we did 22 events over the course of the summer, and attracted people that we averaged, I think, about 400 people a night. And we saw really an audience that had never come to the space before actually coming for the first time. And in some ways, they may or may not make the transition into Roy Thomson Hall, but as a space and as a corporation, we now feel that we have an audience that in some ways will keep coming back, whether it's to the summer programs or hopefully if we do other things in the hall that are linked to that we can make that transition happen. But through these partnerships, we leveraged, we gave them an opportunity to feel that they were part of our institution. They brought us their marketing heft, being able to reach out to audiences that we didn't necessarily have the database to go out to. And through that, we both created the sense of atmosphere that had never been experienced in that particular place before. And it was a great success. We had over 10,000 people over the course of the summer. Some of our biggest nights were nights that we didn't necessarily know were going to be big nights. We had a Mongolian punk band in, Hungai, and that was our biggest attendance. We had almost 700 people crammed into the square that night. So it was amazing to sort of see the response that we got from communities, and the partners who we were there with took great pride in the fact that they felt it wasn't just a Roy Thomson show, they felt it was their show. And that partnership and that equity exchange really contributed to the success of the venue.
I think Fall for Dance North is different from what these two are speaking about in the sense that it was a brand new organization. And as such, it just would not have happened without the partnerships that we formed. There were many, many partnerships because Fall for Dance North is a team of 3 people and 3 people who have full-time jobs. So to put on the festival that we did was an enormous feat, and as I said, just frankly would not have happened without a few key partnerships. The biggest one would have been the Sony Center. So just to step back a bit, Fall for Dance North it's based on a festival that is produced by City Center in New York. So it is modeled on something that is already very successful. And it was conceived as an audience development initiative. So the idea is that for $10, you get to see a full program of some of the best dance companies in the world. So last year on our program, we had companies like the National Ballet of Canada performing in the same program as an Aboriginal hoop dance piece. We had a classical Indian company from India. There was a company from Brazil. So our hope is that in bringing people to see a wide spectrum of dance, that they will fall in love with dance. And frankly, it's not a big risk because for $10, what can you get for $10 these days?
First Thursdays.
sorry, I'm speaking to the wrong people here. When Ilter, who is our artistic director and co-founder, first presented the idea to the Sony Center, he pitched it as something that the Sony Center would produce. The Sony Center, though, it's not equipped to do that. That's not what we do. What the Sony Center could do and what they did do, which was incredibly valuable, was they provided the venue. So we did not pay rent at the Sony Center. And as you know, the Sony Center, it has a fully equipped rehearsal hall. It has breakout spaces, huge lobbies. It has a stage with an appropriate dance floor, dance booms. We have just tons of equipment to throw at this production. And then also what the Sony Center provided was human resources. So we had access to the Sony Center's marketing team, to the education and outreach manager at the Sony Center at the time, and also to the production department. And as I said, as a team of 3, that human resources element was critical. We just would not have been able to make it work. So from the Sony Center's perspective, just in speaking to the need to have, for the partnership to work for both, Fall for Dance North came at a really at a good time, frankly. The Sony Center, I think, is perceived to be a very commercial building. It's a huge building, which is partly why we have a lot of commercial product there. But we really are trying to sort of rebrand the Sony Center and make people aware of what the venue is capable of doing. And so from that perspective, an event like Fall for Dance North was incredibly valuable. It brought a whole bunch of people into the Sony Center that never come to the Sony Center. We analyzed our sales data, and 64% of the people who came to Fall for Dance North had never purchased a ticket to the Sony Center ever before. That's huge. The Sony Center does, we have comedy, we have big concerts, we have dance, Luminato comes into the building every year. We do a huge spectrum of programming, and 64% had never set foot in that building before. So that was amazing. I would say, thankfully the partnership will continue next year, or else there wouldn't be a year two. And I really see it as that partnership is growing. The civic theaters, as some may know, have been amalgamated. So right next door, there's a 900-seat theater, there's a 450-seat theater, the Bluma Appel and the Jane Mallet. And so our partnership with the Sony Center is also a way for us to grow the festival.
Just a question for you, Madeleine. With the Sony Center being there, and Mark not being here, and John Tory not being here, so Mark gives you the venue for free. Mm-hmm. Okay, taxpayers' money, being well spent. In my mind. Well spent. How are the discussions going for how year two is going to go in year three? Because at a certain point in time, you're going to have to pay for the venue, or have some sort of arrangement, cost sharing of some sort. Have you started those discussions yet?
No. Well, yes. What we have discussed is that the arrangement will continue. So that the Sony Center didn't really come on as officially a co-producer last year. To be honest, I think a lot of people didn't believe we could pull off what we did, and I think, therefore, people shied away from making the partnerships official, so to speak, and public. And now the Sony Center has come on board and has agreed to a three-year agreement under the exact same terms. So at least for the next 3 years, we will have the venue, and we will also have the human resources support. In return, we are recognizing the Sony Center officially as a co-producer for this event. And as I explained, that has, optically, that has a huge value for the Sony Center.
Chris, what are the plans for this summer coming up?
We will continue the series, and we're going back to a lot of partners that we did work with last year, and looking at adding some new ones. The idea over time is to expand it. We're currently 2 nights a week, so we're hoping eventually to get up to 3. We wanted 1 more year of just making sure that it was working well before we made that leap. But again, just trying to build on the success of last summer at this point.
You talked about working with Hillside and very successful Lula Lounge, etc. How do some of them, in their mandate as not-for-profit organizations, and not that this is your responsibility to look into, but that might be outside of the scope of their mandate, to co-present something not in their own venue, not in their own city even? Did any of them discuss that, or was just they're going to take on this project?
Well, I think to go back to the panel, or Bob's talk before, I think the risk for them was very, very low. All we were looking for them to do was to spend a bit of time working with our team to come up with appropriate artists to go onto the bill. There was no financial risk for them, so it was purely a programmatic and marketing partnership. And again, we gave them the profile as part of the series. If you see Lula Lounge, again, it might not only be Lula, say the mix of the people who came out to the 2 Lula shows were 20% Lula, 40% patio people, and then say another 40% people walking by. That 80% that weren't the Lula people were being exposed to their brand, which hopefully would drive traffic. If they had an incredible evening watching the Lula All-Stars and then knew they could see them couple weeks later back into the lounge, then I think that's the point of equity exchange where they feel that is actually building on their brand and their business.
Sean, and before I get to the hard question, which is coming next, so with the Amima Photo Prize, how many more years is it going? How far do you look down the road with them as corporate sponsors? And do you see that changing and being more dynamic as you go along?
Yeah, I mean, it's a program that's meant to respond to both partners' level of engagement. So actually, we're in negotiation right now, in full transparency, to extend the partnership for X number of years. And that's looking very good.
What's X?
It's the X. I can't tell you. That's why I said X. So we're coming out of a 3-year agreement following the first 5, and now we're looking into the future. We come up with a strategic plan for that particular partnership every year. It almost runs like a mini institution within the institution. Because there's such a large group of staff who work on it across organizations, it has a dedicated project manager, and we think about it in sort of multi-year chunks. So we're talking about what are the overarching objectives and what are the things we're going to be looking at in terms of our strategies and tactics to move the prize and partnership forward. Those are 2 different things. You know, the partnership is the art in the office piece and the data piece. The prize is the expression of that partnership and the way that we are speaking to the public about the partnership. So we think about that in a multi-year plan, and then we also think about how we're going to measure it in a multi-year plan. So there's targets according to KPIs, key performance indicators, that tell us how we're doing. I mean, I feel like in some ways doing this partnership was like getting my MBA, because we had to learn at the AGO so many business practices that we did not use, especially around measurement and how you tell a story of what you're trying to do. So yeah, it's more to come.
So read the newspapers when you sign on for
soon. Yeah.
Okay, now a equally as interesting question, and perhaps more difficult. I want to know about a relationship, perhaps not with your organization, perhaps with a neighbor down the street, some organization you've heard of that screwed up.
You want like a breakup story?
Yeah, well, get those later at the reception.
I mean, obviously, I don't think any of us are going to talk about what organizations specifically we've had bad relationships with, but I think in principle, I have had bad relationships or partnerships that started out. I mean, we talked about having shared values at the very beginning and a kind of mutual reciprocity around what's possible. I think every partnership that I've embarked on has started out in that way, because I wouldn't sign the AGO onto a partnership unless it did. But when it goes bad, I think there's 2 things in my experience that happen. One is a breakdown of communication, and the other is a lack of honesty or transparency, and they're related. So we had a partner. We often partner on our First Thursday program with different arts organizations who will give us a little bit of extra funds to round out our program. For those of you, does everybody know what First Thursdays are? They're a monthly sort of art party for relatively younger audiences. Organizations often partner with us to help us expand the scope of the program, but also to bring in their own audiences and different audiences and generate profile for their brand. It can be good for us because we can do more things, but it can be complicating for us because there's other partners to work with, and partnerships always make things more complicated. Always more work, always more complicated. So we had a situation where there was, the AGO is bound by CARFAC to pay artist fees according to certain thresholds, and we should be paying those artist fees. There was an organization who, when we signed on, told they were going to bring 2 artist projects to the table, told me they were paying artist fees. I told them what the artist fees need to be paid for when they came to the AGO. Communication kind of broke down over the course of the project. We took on more than we thought we would. And the artist, at the end of the night, when we were wrapping up his project, said, "Man, that was a lot of work to not get paid." And so we never partnered with them again, and we never would. That's one example. Another example is when you're partnering with an organization that's in a similar kind of planning production cycle as you, and you both get busy at the same times, and you both have a lot going on, you have to be even more diligent about communication. And it's really easy for that to break down, or for somebody to miss a series of conference calls or whatever. And push can come to shove when you're working on projects with big institutions like the AGO specifically, where decisions need to be made or things need to happen that can really affect the outcome of a project. So we were partnering with somebody to present an aerial work, and aerial work at the AGO with our building operations and our health and safety restrictions, and they wanted to hang from the rafters in Walker Court. You can imagine, it's really difficult. It's possible, but it's difficult. And our partner missed 4 or 5 or 6 different touch points and different deadlines. And so in the end, the project was compromised. I can say that. We went forward with it, but in a compromised way. And it was in the context of First Thursday. And the artist was really unhappy, really, really unhappy. And what ended up happening was, because our partner was their primary point of contact and they were really bad at communication, it all came back on us. And in my opinion, we weren't necessarily the ones who, it didn't need to happen that way. And we were really trying for it to not happen that way. So again, I would be really reticent to partner with them again. And for me, I'm always looking for people who I can look across the table with and talk to like a human, right? And have a real conversation with, and have an honest conversation with about our objectives, and get some of the, negotiation piece out of the way at the very beginning, but continue to be talking about those principles from conception to production and afterward. We're in a partnership right now, and it's working really well.
That was just announced this morning.
Yes.
And I didn't see it in the news yet, so
I haven't seen you.
let us.
Well, we announced today
This is
that
hot off the
that
presses.
Steve Martin's going to be talking at Roy Thomson Hall. It's the first time we've had one of sort of the talks that we would typically do at the AGO at Roy Thomson, and it's the beginning of what we hope will be a larger conversation with some other aspects. So that came out today at noon.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Around the Lauren Harris show that Steve Martin co-curated that opens at the AGO on July 1st.
Right, and the show has already been in Los Angeles to huge acclaim.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, so June 22nd, Roy Thomson Hall, Steve Martin in conversation with Andrew Hunter, who's our curator of Canadian art.
buy tickets now. AGO.
Actually, next week.
Next week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, something that hasn't gone well or that you heard didn't go well?
Well, I think what's always interesting to think about is the way that your organization works when partnerships are constructed. And in a lot of cases, I would say in particular on the corporate side, the idea and the delivery are somewhat separated from each other, usually through a development department or a corporate sponsorship department. And I think that's where you can often get yourself into trouble, because I think that the mandate of the development department is obviously to hit revenue goals and to sell. And so they're off there meeting and pitching with various corporate sponsors who, again, with brand alignment, have very specific objectives. So goes back to my Luminato days, but where we sort of had very complex and in-depth relationships with multiple corporate partners. L'Oreal was our main partner for the whole time I was there, and the way that deal worked was actually L'Oreal Canada, the parent brand, was the sponsor, but each of the up to 20 brands that fell under that could activate during the festival.
Whoa.
So it was essentially we're managing 20 partnerships as opposed to just one.
Wow.
And there would be, because it was so complex and moving so fast and furiously, you would get insane requests from people on your development team that they had already kind of said yes to, and then came to you and said, you need to make this happen. And there were times where we tried our best to deliver whatever we could, and there were other times where we absolutely said, absolutely not, this is not going to happen.
Like makeup lessons with Laurie Anderson?
Well, worse. The worst one that I had to basically say a big fat no to was at one point L'Oreal Professional was one of the brands that could be activated, and our team had told them that we had Joni Mitchell in town for a week, and so they came to me and said, oh, well, L'Oreal Professional wants to style her hair for each day during the course of the festival. And I was like, I'm not even going to take that request forward. Just shut it down. And even more recently, we have a great relationship with Labatt's, who's our beverage partner. And so one of their big things recently, I'm sure you've seen all the media, is that they want Budweiser to be cool and they want to align it with music. And so a lot of it is negotiation. Like on the patio, they wanted to install what they called the Bud meter, so which was this kind of like literally that, you know, when you raised your buds up in the air, which they wanted us to do from the stage, the meter would go to like from lame to cool, which we tried to convince them that it would actually, as you raise your buds up, you'd actually go from cool to lame. But yeah, it was just one of those things that didn't quite fit, and even you know, and so we worked on a compromise where we knew that the brand fit for that space wasn't the best one. It was more of a craft beer crowd that we were drawing to the space, and Bud was not the right fit. So we've now, as we look at next year, we're actually changing the brand that's more aligned. But you know, we had one instance where they sent brand ambassadors, aka Bud Girls, who were on the staircase of Roy Thomson Hall, sort of welcoming people, and it just it changed the whole feel and vibe of the evening, and it was just improper brand alignment, and I think that's what's often difficult to manage.
Okay. Madeleine?
My stories are not nearly as exciting. I think with Fall for Dance, I think that the most difficult partnership for us was actually with New York City, City Center, New York. Sort of in line with my comment about the Sony Center, I don't think City Center thought that we'd actually pull this off in Toronto. And so when I flew down to New York to have a preliminary conversation with the executive director of City Center, she was very supportive. She said she'd fly to Toronto and she'd help us fundraise. You know, there were talks of sharing programming, which is a great idea and something that we are trying to do again, to try to mitigate costs. And then we never really connected with them again until we had our first article in the paper, and they were not pleased. They didn't like our logo. They didn't like the way we were talking about City Center New York in terms of, you know, we had said it was, you know, based on Fall for Dance New York, and they didn't like that. So there's a lot of things that that they were displeased with, and I really think it was just a shock. So to your point, you know, in that instance, a really honest, upfront conversation outlining the parameters of what we were doing in Toronto would have been really, really helpful. As a result of that, they actually approached us with a license agreement to use the name Fall for Dance, and it was really because of the way that our initial partnership was handled. And thankfully, you know, I had a very civil conversation with them, a really encouraging conversation, and it sort of all came out that that's why this license agreement had come about, and it went away. So yes, having those upfront conversations are incredibly important.
How much did they want in the licensing agreement? To use the name. You want to talk about that?
Too much.
Well, too much for me. It was a 3-year licensing agreement. It was $5,000 US the first year, which of course is who knows what at this point, and then $10,000 the second year and $10,000 the third year. So we have changed that agreement.
Happily, it's gone away.
Yes, not entirely, but enough that, but yes, and there's a lot of goodwill, and just the language in that agreement, you know, it was that Toronto would defer all of its programming to New York, which doesn't work for us. We have different programming cycles. They actually announce very late. They don't announce their program until the summer. We are ready to announce any day now. So, so for them to say that ultimately we have to defer our programming to them, it just doesn't work. So, you know, this very honest conversation resulted in, you know, that kind of language, that sort of negative language going away. And instead it was that we will work together to try to bring international artists. We will always stay in touch. We will, you know, we agreed on language that Fall for Dance North is inspired by New York. And the situation was resolved literally in a 10-minute conversation.
Good. Mm-hmm. Just before I take some questions from the floor, I'm going to name names and talk about the sponsorship line in the sand from a while back. The Royal Winnipeg Ballet had a long-standing relationship with Du Maurier when they were allowed to spend money on the arts. And Du Maurier came up to the point with the Royal Winnipeg where they were demanding to have Du Maurier orange on the curtains before the ballet. Is this going too far? What do you think? Or perhaps Evelyn Hart should have had a Du Maurier orange tutu? Where's the line?
All the dancers had to smoke the orange stage door.
Well, no, all the dancers do smoke, but where's that line?
I think it stays outside the door. Like we had a bit of a hard fast rule at Luminato where nothing came in the auditorium. So we would sometimes activate the lobby spaces, but our first instance of that was in the first festival, 2007. We did the world premiere of Leonard Cohen and Philip Glass's Book of Longing, and I remember that I forget, one of the L'Oreal brands was on that, and they actually wanted to send in brand ambassadors to go down to the seats and hand out samples, and we had to really make that case that the minute the people in particular walk through, I believe that the whole experience begins once you walk into the front door of the theater, but even more so once you enter the chamber, then that should be the place where you start to prepare yourself for whatever you're going to see. And to have brand ambassadors into that space, I felt was crossing the line.
Sean, there.
I think it depends on the situation. For us, we've pushed it a lot over the last 4 or 5 years at the AGO, but to the extent that we don't have a house necessarily where you're in this one space that's before the art and then you're in the art. The art's everywhere. We do have some spaces where art isn't, where there are sort of more social gathering spaces, or the places where we put bars, for example, when we have our big events. But it's on a case-by-case basis. I think we make sure that we never do something that an artist would feel uncomfortable with. That's our check. We look at each other and say, would we ever put a logo on the wall in the gallery space? No. Would we allow a sponsor to come in the context of an event, in a space where there isn't art, and do a kind of art making where they gave away an invitation to come into their store and get 10% off, which we did with Joe Fresh? Yeah, we probably would. So it's a gut check, and it's a conversation with colleagues, and we do really evaluate these things on a case-by-case basis. One example where it was beyond the line for us was, and I would say, by the way, yes, the Du Maurier thing is beyond the line. We had a sponsor who wanted to activate by bringing in, they were going to commission an artist to make a sculpture out of the flip-flops that they sold, and they were going to put it on a plinth and put a label on it, which to us felt confusing for our visitors, and also undermine the artists whose work we had commissioned to specifically perform that night under a different set of circumstances. So anything that looks like art, feels like art, is being commissioned as art, we don't do.
Madeleine, any line?
I would agree that it's on a case-by-case basis, at least the way the Sony Center approaches it, and that's sort of, I have to wear my Sony Center hat to answer that. We haven't gone into the theater yet, but I know that we would, and I don't. It just depends. We do such different programming in that space that sometimes it would not be offensive at all. For example, we've just recently purchased a huge movie screen which will live in the theater, and we are doing more and more programming of those feature film with orchestra shows, and we absolutely would put a sponsor on that movie screen, for instance. And then in other cases, we have F&B sponsors. We definitely would allow, beer into the venue for certain things, but then there are definitely situations where we have drawn the line on that. I can't think of one specifically, but I know that we have.
Well, and it depends on how it feels, because now I just realized I said we wouldn't allow sponsorship in the galleries, but every gallery you walk into has a donor's name, right? So it all depends.
Yeah. And just to clarify, we, for Live at Massey Hall, which is one of our series, we do project because TD is our current sponsor, and we have a big gobo at the back of the stage that says Live at Massey Hall, and it says in partnership with TD, and we do have the gobo there. I was thinking more so about the intrusiveness of having a person hand something out to you. Mm-hmm. For me, that was the sort of line.
Mm-hmm.
Questions for anybody? No? Okay, I have another question for you then. Product placement. And so Madeleine, you, because some of your shows at the Sony Center, not the Fall for Dance shows,
Yeah.
but some of the other shows that have come in have had product placement in them.
Have we?
So what happens when you get a prepackaged show that comes into your venue that has product placement in it that might be in conflict with one of your venue sponsors?
I can't think of a situation where that has happened. Basically, any rental that comes in the door, we accept because they're paying our bills. So I can't think of. But okay. The Sony Center actually, we actually haven't had many conflicts. We don't have that many venue sponsors, to be honest. We have our F&B sponsors, and we guard those. And we also used to have a car. We have Rogers, and Sony, of course. So I can't think of an example of product placement, but certainly when shows come in the door with conflicting sponsors, the venue sponsors are supposed to supersede the show sponsors. I have to admit that that's not always the case. We do push our car out the door sometimes.
I would say, I mean, product placement is all in how you define it. For example, we have artists that are Steinway artists, so they would come with the Steinway piano, and I think that, because of the contextual link, is okay product placement. We did have one instance last year where all of our jaws dropped as one of the artists did an Arbonne pitch from the stage that we weren't expecting at all, and then sort of indicated that she would be downstairs in the lobby afterwards to take anybody's orders.
Wow.
So we certainly do not allow that sort of thing to happen. But I think what's also interesting was we had Shad was one of our Live at Massey Hall performers last year, and in the sort of confluence of events, we for that year had American Express come on as our sponsor for Live at Massey Hall. Now Shad, if you know him, one of the things that he talks about is he's very anti-credit card, and he thinks that he has this whole campaign to get kids off credit cards. So the fact that he all of a sudden was going to be on the stage at an event that was sponsored by a credit card, he was really conflicted with that. So we had to have that sort of open dialogue about how to manage that, and to think creatively about ways in which both could coexist. But it was something that just because of the way things fell into place, we didn't really think or make that connection. But those things, artists in particular, I think are leery of the fact that by having a corporate sponsorship or a brand association in the venue, that they're by default promoters or spokespeople for that particular brand. And so we find ourselves, because of the indie music world, as being very brand agnostic and afraid of brands, that we often have that conversation internally about how to manage that.
And the other side of that as well, American Express, if they knew Shad's point of view, is probably not going to want their logo up there either at that time. So how was it resolved?
I think everyone just sort of, our biggest fear was that on the night of the performance, there would be some sort of speech from the stage from the artist that would be in conflict with the sponsor. That didn't happen, and we just had an open dialogue with Shad and his team about the sensitivity of it all, and they kind of understood it and got it, but he made sure that we knew that was something that was of concern to him.
Yeah, similar stuff with us. We've had artists who have questioned some of our sponsors, and we've been in negotiations with them. We had Grandmaster Flash talk about Puma from the stage, which was fine because that's what he did, and we couldn't control it. But it's not something that we make a habit of.
It's a bit of a slippery slope with performers as well, because they do have merch.
Mm-hmm.
You provide merch tables, in performing arts venues, and artists, if they're a living artist, you know what? They've got a gallery somewhere. They're probably wanting to sell more pictures. So it is a bit of a slippery slope when they're, pitching their own product at the end of act, the first act.
It's
saying,
rare.
CDs for the
In
launch.
my experience, it's rare. I mean, people will, some people will say I have merch, but it's not been a huge problem for us. In terms of the artists.
It's very much our world where that happens, where usually it's CDs and T-shirts, but the other night I had Emily Claire Barlow in, and she's developed a whole line of nail polish based on sort of the colors in her world, and she was selling that at the merch table the other night. So I think artists, in some cases on the commercial side in particular, are thinking about how to leverage their brand across a whole series of different business lines, and I think it's becoming more and more common, and it's getting complex.
Is it just growing from the big, Rolling Stone concerts where they have, the $80 T-shirts and they have the full line of merch that's, run by another company completely, and they just get licensing deals off it? Is that filtering down to the more indie artists having nail polish? I've never heard of that. I think it's quite fun.
It all depends on the artist. In some cases, yes. We did a couple of shows last year with Rheostatics around the music inspired by the Group of Seven, and we partnered with them. We made some T-shirts, they brought some records, and negotiated a deal between us and them, in part because we have a shop and they produce products based on all of the exhibitions that we do, and they produce product just for the Rheostatics shows. But it's negotiated on a case-by-case basis on the same terms that we've really been talking about throughout the panel.
I mean, I think more so there's a whole, everyone is trying to maximize revenue in the game right now, and the latest thing to sort of hit our sector is third-party VIP events where you don't even know about them. So at the very last minute, you'll get word that, say, Vance Joy is coming through, and this third party has sold a VIP event to 50 people. That doesn't go into the gross of the show. It just goes to the company and eventually the artist. But they've promised you need to find a location for them. So in some cases, you have to go back and say, listen, we have actual hard costs associated with fulfilling this event, and they try to sneak it through as much as possible and try to make it your problem. So I think that's the world has changed. Everyone's trying to figure out how to make that extra little bit of a margin on all stuff that's coming through, and it's getting complicated.
And if you don't know about those partnerships ahead of time,
Yeah.
You could be stuck without seats, especially if you've got a show that's sold out.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're presented with 50 people. So
Yeah, it's usually a top off to people who've already bought tickets, but they get an extra premium on top of that.
yeah, for your show.
In some of our cases, the merch sales have actually helped us negotiate better artist deals, because the artists know they will sell so much merch that they're willing to do the show for a smaller fee. So.
Like the Doras and that type of thing.
Exactly. I'm thinking of the kid shows where, you can't fight with a 4-year-old who wants Dora. So in those cases, and also in some of our, we've done a show for a few years now called Final Fantasy, and it's clips of the video game accompanied by a live orchestra, and they sell very expensive merch. They sell the video games, which are, I don't know what they cost. They're $100. I mean, we're not talking.
Don't look at me.
Yeah, I don't know either. We're not talking about T-shirts and CDs, and so they make a lot of money off it, and the show is worth it.
Thank you all for sharing your opinions today. Sean, Chris, Madeleine. And you're going to be around for the next little bit as we have a mix and mingle and talk. So if any of you do have questions, by all means, check it.